to an interview with Staking Rewards at the Staking Summit. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Florian. I'm working at the core team of the Q blockchain.
Okay.
And the Q blockchain is basically a new layer 1 with a focus on governance.
Okay. And how do you define governance?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Basically, governance is human coordination. And human coordination in the Web3 space is very essential. And you can go back in history of blockchain, most prominently in the Bitcoin case, there was a Bitcoin civil war period, where in 2013 to 2017, people and the community were arguing what is the meaning of cash in the peer-to-peer cash system and the white paper, the title of it.
Yeah.
Is it a high transaction, fast settlement, or is it rather a bearer asset instrument which nobody has control of? Yeah, so you have ultimately the big block and the small block camp. And this shows you that even though you're talking about proof of work and code is law, in the end it's just human coordination.
It's always,
and like Bitcoin's decision to have no governance or minimal governance is always already a governance decision. So whatever you do, if you have no governance, you have governance. If you have specific governance, you have governance. It's really from A to Z, very important to the space. And the space is starting to recognize us more and more.
Yeah. So how does Q come into the room? So let's look at some examples. Like I'm sure most of our users and most of our viewers have experienced some form of bad governance at some point.
Yeah.
Give us a few examples of bad governance. What is bad governance?
Oh yeah, this where to start here? There are some technical stuff. For example, if you have voting and proposals, you always need to make sure you have some kind of sanity check. So for example, a typical attack vector in voting is you have a vote which looks boring, unpopular, barely no one is paying attention to it, and then a few seconds before the end of the vote, someone is borrowing a bunch of tokens, voting on it, and there is no locking mechanism, or it's only one block long locked, so it's not expensive.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you have the vote in favor of who proposed it, and there was a governance attack by, maybe not calling the names right now, but they wanted to add an eligible asset to a lending scheme, and they created a proposal. It was neglected by the community until the very last moment when they voted it in. And then the community was crying. So in the queue system, for example, any governance decision which can change the queue system, it has an objection period. And there is a specific group of stakeholders who are allowed to object a specific vote if it's against the queue constitution. Yeah, and this already gives you a feeling about how our governance structure is laid out.
Okay, so just to bring the users into the conversation, what is the Q constitution and how does Q position itself? Are you an independent network? Do you plug into other networks? Give us a bit of insight into that.
Yeah. So the Q constitution is really the fundamental rule book of our system. It's written as a private contract, and this is an important detail. So next to the validators, we have a different set of independent full nodes. They are called the root nodes. But the root nodes, they are publicly known entities. You can only become voted in as a root node if you give up anonymity and say who you are, get voted in by the Q token holders, and then you have two elements. You have a name and you have a private contract. And what this allows you is all the time you can call a private arbitration process, and we integrated with the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. They offer private arbitration as a service, and what this allows you is you can have an on-chain dispute and settle it in an off-chain private arbitration court, and it can be enforced because the root nodes are publicly known entities. And this keeps the root nodes under control, and the root nodes keep the validators under control, so you avoid validator collusion, censoring of transactions, this kind of stuff. And what we are doing, because you ask how to integrate in the ecosystem, our assumption is the following. Any system can opt in to our governance modules and use this. So we are building a market for governance, a governance as a service approach, where projects, they opt in to use the governance, they pay a share of their revenue back to the ecosystem in exchange for these governance features, and then it can be on-chain, on the Q blockchain as well. So the first thing we built on the mainnet was, for example, validator slashing. So slashing on Q is not based on code is law. It's based on the constitution.
Okay.
But that means it is also not based on social consensus on Twitter.
Yeah.
So social slashing is very popular recently.
Yeah.
We call it constitutional slashing. As a validator, you can defend against it. You can call the private arbitration court. And as an application, for example, insurance cases, they understand this very well, that as a last level of escalation of the dispute, you can call a private arbitration process. So we call it enforceable governance. We give this as a service.
Wow.
We are EVM compatible. So any, for example, you could be a DEX. You run your DEX on Solana because you want to have high throughput, low fees. But maybe your treasury, maybe your DAO, you run on the Q blockchain because you have a different dispute resolution mechanism backing it.
Yeah.
And this is really the hypothesis we're having in mind and working on. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's basically what we do.
We need that. We need that in the space.
Love to hear that.
So playing the devil's advocate, so here's the Q constitution. Now, you've already made governance decisions, but you're taking a stance, you're taking a view of what is good governance, right? Through the constitution. Now, let's say a DEX wants to take on this constitution, but they don't agree with section B and C. Can they change that, or how does that work?
Yeah, so updating the constitution is a process. So there is a process. It's basically a Q token holder vote with a rather high quorum and a majority requirement. Yeah, that should ensure that it's very hard to change the constitution. It shouldn't be too easy, but it shouldn't be impossibly hard. Yeah, it's a balance you have to strike. And like most of the proposals I mentioned, in order to protect against attacks, there is an objection phase by the root nodes. So any change, any update of the constitution which is not in line with the constitution can be objected by root nodes, and to keep them in check, to protect against abuse, you know their names, you could go with them to private arbitration court if they would misbehave. Yeah?
But so if it comes down to the root nodes, who's in control of the root nodes?
Yeah, who's in control of the root nodes?
Yeah.
The private contract they agreed on.
Okay.
So a root node, in comparison to a validator has tokens at stake. A root node has a name at stake and the tokens at stake.
Okay.
And the name at stake, if you look on our ecosystem map, we have publicly announced notable root nodes. There is from Deutsche Telekom, TMMS, there is a Greenfield 1. So these are names acting as root nodes on Q, and they are following the Q constitution. Now, if they don't follow this, they are acting against it, and then you can open a case file in front of a private arbitration court.
Okay, and how did you develop the Q constitution? Because is it now your opinion, or where does this come from? Because I know that there's a lot of backing and research that went into it. So tell us a bit about that.
It was a very sophisticated process. Like most of the time and effort was put in the constitution. Basically, one of the team members has a legal background, worked as a lawyer, and then left the space to become working in telecom, Web 1, Web 2, now Web 3. So a lot of experience there. And together with a team of lawyers, internationally reputational lawyers, they wrote the constitution. So it reads, some people said it reads like the Constitution of Europe. They had their feeling. It's a very legally sophisticated document. Of course, it's a little bit a hard read in the beginning, but it's like with most of the jurisdictional text, it must be as good enough to stand valid in front of the court of the ICC. Okay. And we get their feedback looking on it, and they said, yes, with this kind of contract, you can have a private arbitration case. Okay. Yeah? So lots of time, effort, lawyers, lots of money went into writing the constitution.
And so, like, from a user perspective, why should we care about governance? Because we don't usually see good governance turnouts in governance votes, right?
Yeah.
People see it and they're like, oh, too much effort, and they don't take part. But why should we care? Like, why is this even important in the crypto space?
Yeah, it's obviously a tough topic. Good governance is important when it becomes to be important.
Yes.
Like, it's okay for a voter not to vote if he's doing this voluntarily. If he voluntarily can anytime take part in the voting process, it's okay if he's abstaining a bit. In our system, there is multiple levels of checks and balances. So if you have a malicious proposal, but it's inline of the, it's outside the realm of the Q constitution. You have the protection layer of the root node to protect the minority or the majority who is not voting.
Yes.
So it's a design solution. So different levels of checks and balances. The root nodes have an obligation to object if it's against the constitution. And then if it's within the boundaries of the constitution, and there's an update which is not in favor of, say, Q token holders, then it's really their motivation to get involved in the governance process and change the system. And governance token holders having the ability to vote at any time is a counterforce for the minority who is very active in the governance.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated topic. We have two mechanisms. One is a delegation of voting power. So you can have, for example, the lawyers, they are also acting as root nodes on our system, but they could also become vote delegates. They say, okay, we have a lot of knowledge, we are invested in the space, we have an incentive, you can vote your voting power to us and then represent more token holders.
Okay.
So you have delegation.
Yeah.
And then we have a system called expert panels.
Okay.
And expert panels, they handle a lot of small-grained governance decisions which occur more frequently, and they are voted in by Q token holders. So again, the Q token holder gives up a little bit of sovereignty, but gives it in the hand of the expert panel.
Yes.
And the expert panel can change parameters here and there. And if they misbehave, they can be voted out by the Q token holders, and then the action needs to be corrected.
Okay. That's amazing. And it's very thorough, it's very inclusive at the same time.
I hope so, yeah.
Okay, and so how would you say, in your opinion, how do you incentivize people to take part in governance, right? Because people act on incentives, right? Like, how do you, in your view, what are some creative ideas to incentivize participation?
We've seen a lot of approaches like a decay in voting power, maybe an increase in voting power if you take part in the votes. We basically have a Q token holder reward. So if you're using your Q token in order to vote on the Q system, you lock it in the Q vault, and there it can be used for governance, it can be used for delegation to validators, and there you also earn a reward. And then there is incentive programs that basically look on the activity within the Q vault, how active have you been as a voter, and then reward these people. So it's a classic incentive scheme. These are options. And then there's a time lock feature, but we didn't build this out yet. For example, if you commit to lock your coins for voting for a longer period, get a higher voting weight, or get a higher reward from the reward scheme. Yeah. These all could be some ways, but in the end, it's a voluntary decision to vote. You shouldn't feel needed to vote and feel like it's something you don't actually want to do, but then you have to do to get the reward. Yeah. You should have the feeling that you're secure because there is a framework of rules securing you, and changing these rules is not easy. Yeah. And then you have the knowledge that there is an independent layer of actors like the root nodes objecting stuff which is against the rule set, and then when topics become critical or important, more voters will come up in the vote. But it's one of our research focus points. Yeah.
No, you guys are doing a great job.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and so for viewers that are listening, they're looking at Q and they're like, wow, this is super interesting. How can they get involved? What is the first step for them to get to know what you guys do and how to take part in this? Yeah,
of course, we have a website, q.org. It's very easy to remember, right?
Yes.
And q.org has all the details, a link to our Discord community. We currently are looking forward to diversify the ecosystem. So we have onboarded a few strategic partners at the first quarter of this year, 22. And now we are looking to diversify validators. We have about 20 on the mainnet. We want to reach 100. We diversify further the root nodes. We have root nodes from legal personnel. We have root nodes from legal personnel from Liechtenstein. We have root nodes from lawyers and from New York. We have root nodes in the academia space. Yeah. So these are very unique stakeholders. But we want to further diversify. We have the first root node recently from South Africa, actually.
Nice.
Yeah, and we have
representing
South America, first one. I think we don't have a root node from Asia. So increase the presence there, and then applications. It's of course not easy for applications to get all of these governance as a service and so on. few applications we spoke to, mainly insurance protocols. They can understand why this governance as a service, dispute resolution, escalation of disputes is important. We have onboarded a first DeFi insurance protocol. We're talking to a second one. We're talking to a project which is doing on-chain dispute resolution on Ethereum, and they understand easily why real world. This is needed with a real world setting, and we basically want to invite the ecosystem to have a look on us, deploy on us, and if understood, integrate with the Q governance.
Okay, cool. But there you have it, guys. Q.org. Check them out. They're doing a great job, and we all need to take part in this. This isn't just, it's not only up to Q, it's up to all of us to have a say and drive this industry forward.
Q beyond code is law. Governance matters.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, mate.
Cheers.